We are live. All right, welcome to the House Judiciary Committee this Friday morning, continuing our consideration of S-193, an act relating to establishing a forensic facility. We have this morning an additional witness. Susan, if you can join us. Thank you for being here. And if you could identify yourself for the record and proceed.
Good morning. My name is Susan Aronoff. I am representing the Vermont Developmental Disabilities Council this morning, and I'm going to be beginning my testimony, which I submitted electronically, with a brief description of the Vermont Developmental Disabilities Council, because I don't think, well, there might be one person in the room familiar with our work. So, the Vermont Developmental Disabilities Council is a statewide board. We are created by a federal law, which is known as the DD Act. It's that protects the civil rights of people with developmental disabilities. It was first adopted by Congress in 1970. All 50 states and 6 territories have a developmental disabilities council. 60% of our council members, they're appointed by the governor after being nominated by a nominating committee, are people with a lived experience of a developmental disability or their family members. And family members are really important because, as people in the disability world say, if someone in your family has a disability, you have a disability because of travel, because of everything, because the parents of people with disabilities are really full-time advocates and caretakers from cradle till in Vermont. Their sons and daughters are in their 50s and 60s, and they're still full-time caretakers of their sons and daughters with developmental disabilities. So that lived experience of family members is super important. As you know, with crime victims, families are super important. An estimated 86,000 Vermonters experience a developmental disability the way that is defined under federal law, with approximately 5,100 Vermonters receiving Medicaid-funded services for developmental disability. Sometimes that's through the developmental disability system and support system of care, and sometimes that's through our choices for care system. So under the federal law that created us and all DD councils, we are charged under federal law with engaging at the state level in advocacy, capacity building, and systems change activities that contribute to the coordinated consumer and family centered, consumer and family directed, comprehensive system that includes needed community services, individualized supports, and other forms of assistance that promote self-determination for individuals with developmental disabilities and their families. In addition to our federal role, I'm commenting here on our unique role within the Agency of Human Services. So many of you may or may not know, some of you get email from me, maybe you've seen our platform. It always says susanaronoff.gov. I am a state employee. I think I am the luckiest state employee in the whole state because I'm also a recovering attorney, but I get to work on systems and policy change work for the state. So I have a pension and benefits. I'm in a union. It's great. But I get to advocate, like the advocates for all the organizations that have been defunded and are chasing grants and things like that. And speaking of defunded, we're federally funded. I mentioned that, where our funding is like in jeopardy. Anyway, I'm going to pass this around just because it explains a little bit about who the council is and what we do in our ecosystem. I bring people to the State House a lot to try to introduce them to you guys, because you don't want to talk to the paid. I always tell them, guess what? You are the only person right now in the cafeteria. Look around. You're the only person not being paid to be here. And if you're from the hometown of a legislator, they are going to want to talk to you way more than they're going to want to talk to someone who's being paid to talk to them. So go ahead, meet them, tell them what's top of mind. That's what I do most of the days when I'm here. But year round, our council is very involved in quality assurance activities and other kinds of activities that go on within the Agency of Human Services. I'm housed within the Agency of Human Services, within the Secretary's office. We have signed assurances with the Secretary of Human Services that that allow me to testify publicly as a state employee and take positions that are different from. Sometimes we're in total agreement. In this case, not so much. So I always have to give the disclaimer as a state employee that when I'm testifying to you here today, I am not speaking for the Agency of Human Services. I am speaking for the Vermont Developmental Disabilities Council on behalf of the people with disabilities. And so what I want to say at the outset, I personally have sat on at least 2 study committees related to the front facility. I know you guys have a problem to solve, and I will talk a little bit more about this at the outset. I know you have a problem to solve, and you guys are here to solve problems. Of all of the proposed solutions to the particular problem of what do we do with people who are not competent to stand trial, this is the worst proposal I have seen yet. The summer study committees that I was a part of came up with better ideas than this. They were not located in correctional facilities. We could start there. So what I want to say is, how did we end up in this situation? Where I start my testimony is that the failure to support community-based services does not justify a forensic facility in a correctional facility. The Agency of Human Services wants to house people with disabilities. I want to address Representative Dolan's question right here. Why do we say this is about people with disabilities? Because the only people who are not going to be competent is someone with a disability. Because competency revolves on the ability to do some things. And if you can't do them, it means you have a disability. What is a disability? It's an impairment of a major life activity. So the major life activity of thought, of speech. If someone is not competent, it's because they can't meaningfully assist their attorneys. And the way it's written in here, it used to be, thank you, Eric, for cleaning this up. The House Senate version started with the archaic language of brain disease and defect. And the reason why I was nodding my head when Defender General Valerio was testifying that everyone who's not competent has mental illness, that's a kind of a shorthand way of saying brain disease and defect, mental disease and defect. That's who's not competent. That's how it's been described in law offensively and archaically forever, brain disease and defect. Eric Fitzpatrick cleaned it up and now has language about a qualifying condition. But all of those qualifying conditions would be disabilities. So when I say we want to house people with disabilities in the criminal justice system in a prison, it's because anyone who's not competent, by definition, is going to have a disability. Even the people who are deaf and might not know science, they have the disability of being deaf. So all the people I'm talking about are people with disabilities. I felt like that was getting confusing yesterday.
Okay.
I thank you for that. I appreciate that. I guess is there a difference between a clinical disability and just a general term disability? Because that's what I also want to be aware of. I'm guessing there's a difference, but maybe not.
Oh my God, there are so many. Like if you have a disability, it depends on what for. So like if you have a disability, it's a different standard for employment than it might be for an accommodation and like something else. When I'm saying here disability, I'm not meaning clinical. I'm meaning in terms of the people subject to this, they're not competent to stand trial. So if I'm just saying as a general assertion, if you're not competent to stand trial, you have a disability. It could be and this is what I want to say about the people who potentially involved in this and why I'm here representing the Developmental Disabilities Council, is the way this is cast now. Someone could have Down syndrome. Someone could have Alzheimer's. Someone could be, and I'll describe a client of mine, I said recovering attorney, I've represented adults with psychiatric disabilities first at Vermont Protection and Advocacy as a staff attorney for a number of years now. It's Disability Rights Vermont. Then I did this work in Connecticut. And I was located at the Whiting Forensic Institute, which discuss in detail. And I also taught mental health law at a master's level for 5 years at the University of New Haven, the Henry Lee School of Forensics. And I love these issues. I love these issues much more as exam questions. Like, what's the best commitment statute? But you guys don't want exam questions. You want answers. How can we do this better? How can we do this differently? So we can do this better. We can do this differently. Other states are. Representative Arsenault's question yesterday was spot on. What are other states doing? I have more to say about that, but I'm going to try to get through my written comments, which I hardly ever do, but this time I really want to. So the Agency of Human Services wants to house people with disabilities who are involved with the criminal justice system in a prison. And I say potentially forever, because the way it's written now, the section that addresses the people who are not restorable, it has no discharge plan to a less restrictive therapeutic setting where they could live out the rest of their days in safety, with public safety in mind, but they're not in a correction setting. It just and so potentially forever is not hyperbole in this case. While policing itself, given the rights of the people involved and the history of the oversight of the Agency of Human Services at Woodside alone, this is simply unacceptable. And I say at Woodside alone because I'm going to depart from Defender General Matt Valerio's picture of the Vermont State Hospital pre-Irene. The Vermont State Hospital pre-Irene was under scrutiny from the federal CMS and had been put out of compliance by an inspection team, same inspection team, by the way, weird coincidence, that I worked with putting a similar facility out of compliance in Connecticut. So the picture of Vermont State Hospital before Irene was not great. And that was part of why Governor Shumlin closed it at the time. Now, were adequate resources in place? You know, and no pun intended, a lot of water over many bridges. So we do not support holding people with disabilities who have not been found guilty of crimes in a prison. So specifically, the Vermont Developmental Disabilities Council opposes including people with intellectual disabilities in an institutionally based competency restoration program like the one contemplated in S193. This setting is costly, inappropriate, and at odds with Vermont's developmental disability system of care. Furthermore, people with intellectual disabilities are generally not considered appropriate candidates for competency restoration programs. The intellectual disabilities that prevent an individual from being deemed competent to stand trial, think Down syndrome, think IQ standards, they are not treatable by medication nor alleviated by milieu-based treatment programs. A good attorney, Stuart Scher, will every now and then point to a program in England that involves a lot of staffing, a lot of memory, a lot of repetition, where some people with developmental disabilities are able to tell you who a judge is and who the jury is, and they meaningfully participate in their defense. I would wonder. So just a little bit of background. Vermont, through its laws and policies, has chosen to support nearly all people with disabilities in community-based settings as opposed to institutions. There are states at the states, statistics available that have tracked for the people receiving services funded by Medicaid. It's been called Shift the Balance. Can we go from nursing homes to communities? Vermont used to be ahead of the curve, leading the pack in the transition from institutional-based care to community-based care. Not so much. And if you had a couple hours, I could tell you about Airbnb and some of the other things that have really eroded our ability to care for Vermonters in the community. Like we used to pay, for instance, tax-free stipends to people to be shared living providers. It's adult foster care, but it worked for a lot of people. It worked for people income. It worked. Now, really hard to find shared living providers. Anyway, this idea of creating a facility for people who are hard to serve in the community won't surprise you. It hasn't come up before. And I have a quote here from 2009 from then Commissioner Joan Senecal, who said that certain individuals are very hard to serve in any setting. They might have complex psychiatric needs. They might be highly resistant to supervision. They may try to elope. They may be highly assaultive to staff and peers. They may be extremely emotionally volatile. These characteristics may make it difficult to supervise these individuals in a shared living home or a group home. It may be difficult to retain staff to work with them. When these characteristics are combined with the risk to the public, agencies may feel overwhelmed. In the past 2 decades, a few agencies have stepped forward to take these exceptionally challenging individuals, but at present, no agencies feel able to accept hard-to-serve individuals from another region because concerns about budget, liability, community reaction. Then I put in italics because it's that important. Some suggested a small, secure facility to house a group of these uniquely hard-to-serve individuals, but it's unlikely that grouping the most hard-to-serve individuals together in a single location would be beneficial or cost-effective. The individuals who are the hardest to serve are difficult and dangerous in unique ways. To assemble the combination of treatment and staffing resources to meet the differing needs of the individuals in a single location while keeping the individuals safe from one another would most certainly exceed the cost of our current individually tailored services. The reasoning behind then Commissioner Senecal's opposition to a secure forensic facility was sound in 2010, and it is sound today. In her 2010 report, then Commissioner Senecal suggested that Vermont may wish to provide incentives for a current agency to expand its capacity for these hard-to-serve individuals, or may wish to develop a new service program with a particular mission of serving extraordinarily high-risk individuals with developmental disabilities. It appears that Commissioner Senecal's sound suggestions were soundly rejected by AHS. And I just want to say, I just came from Senate Health and Welfare, where there's a bill right now discussing a study of the designated and specialized service agency system, their payment rates, issues. I think, and I'd be happy to suggest the language, it would be highly appropriate. I asked Mo Rochauer from Vermont Care Partners, is there currently a forensic rate? Does Agency of Human Services pay the designated agencies a higher rate to care for people? Nobody, you can get enriched services sometimes, but nothing like a designated forensic rate. I asked Commissioner Haas because she happened to be standing around. Has AHS looked into sending these 6 people or any of these people out of state to an actual competency restoration program? I think this is a question with an answer, but I didn't get that answer. But I think it's something that could be looked at. Could AHS, so one thing that Connecticut has is the Yale School of Psychiatry, and one thing that the Yale School of Psychiatry has really developed some specialty in is forensics. They are, renowned actually internationally, and one of the people who testified in Senate Health and Welfare is a psychiatrist in UVM, but she has ties to the Yale School of Psychiatry. Maybe the folks from the Yale School of Psychiatry or the Connecticut Forensic Institute could be contracted with. Our mail now goes all the way to Hartford, Connecticut before it comes back to Vermont. It's not that far, 210 miles from Montpelier to Hartford. Maybe it's possible for some of the experts in forensic treatment of some of the most stubborn, difficult cases, could set up a satellite in Vermont, could provide restoration services to the people who can be restored. The thing about competency restoration, and this is what I think the attorney from Disability Rights was trying to say about if you're treating someone for psychiatric disability and they can retain competency, they will. They don't have to be treated in a competency restoration. It's because most of that treatment that restores competency, it's a medication. If you can find a medication that's going to work for a certain individual, the internal stimuli might subside, various things might happen, and they might gain competency, the ability legal competency. If that happens particularly with someone who engaged in really heinous conduct, and they're first gaining the insight and the self-awareness, and I'll give an example from my real life of having killed a pregnant wife. At first realizing that compassion, I think we all try to have compassion. Even someone who's done the most heinous of things ought to have some caring therapeutic supports around them when they come to terms with that. I have a hard time imagining that kind of competency restoration process happening effectively in our correction system as it is right now, without a separate unit, without the kind of clinical supports, without all the things that this is just frankly lacking right now. Other reasons to involve experts in the process is that, and different types of care in the process. Another one of my clients from Connecticut was involved in a murder-suicide. The murder was effectuated. The suicide, not so much. So this was an individual who was using a wheelchair, who needed to be fed, who was not competent to stand trial. And the good state of Connecticut, they didn't even think keeping him in a forensic facility was humane enough. He's now in a secure nursing home. I know that Vermont is maybe developed a secure nursing home with the same outfit I care in Bennington. We can keep the public safe and provide people humane and dignified treatment outside of a correctional setting. It can be done. It is being done. Your question was so spot on. What are other states doing? We're talking about 6 people. The thing I really want to talk about, and I printed out a copy and I have links, is AHS and oversight. So on October 25th, 2023, 7 Days published a 16-page ad-free expose. It actually prints out at like 33 pages, 66. Expose by an award-winning journalist about how young Vermonters were physically restrained, stripped, held in isolation for days at AHS Woodside Juvenile Rehabilitation Center before a lawsuit fought by disability rights caused it to be shuttered in 2024. I really would love it if every single one of you could just read this article. It's fascinating reading, and a lot of people in this building, Representative Richardson, are in the article. Representative Iacovone is the person, when he was DCF commissioner, who hired the superintendent of Woodside, who was found by professionals to be unfit for his job. So good people running a system, doing the best they can. And guess what the biggest conclusion and takeaway from this article was? Because this abuse went on, 7 judges knew about it. The attorney general knew about it. I'm not sure which legislators knew about it, but legislators knew about it. And what would happen when lawsuits would be brought is they would let the individual go. This is the defender general. It's just documented. They had Judge Mary Miles ready to do a big order. And then that individual goes and poof, the case is mooted out. It wasn't until Disability Rights Vermont brought a suit in federal court that the place was. But what Chris Winters had to say when he was then appointed commissioner of DCF in a hearing after the story came out, I think is the best advice ever. So I am just going to quote him. He said, "There must be transparent oversight and accountability for the entire system, but more so for the higher levels of care, particularly any locked or secure sites." And then the biggest takeaway, and solution for this one, but the biggest takeaway, the state cannot be both the ultimate regulator and the provider. So we endorse these principles. The forensic facility must have identified watchdogs who are separated from the operators and providers of the facility. A suggestion that I have. So just want to say a little thing about the protection and advocacy system. What is it? Just like the developmental disability system, it exists in 50 states and territories. It didn't come out of the blue. It didn't come about because Congress one day said it was a good idea. It came about because at the time, Geraldo Rivera was an actual independent investigative journalist. And he went to a place in New York called Woodside. And he discovered undercover in Woodside conditions that people with disabilities were being held in that literally shocked the conscience of the country in a way that I hope we're still as shockable now. Abu Ghraib photos kind of caught the attention of people, the same, if people remember those, the same way. And as a result of the horrors that were uncovered at which I was going to say Woodside at Willowbrook, Geraldo Rivera, yeah, he went to Willowbrook, not Woodside. But as a result of those horrors, the protection advocacy system was created. And one of the powers the protection advocacy system has is 24/7 access to the facilities, unannounced, to the facilities in which people with disabilities are being held. So will they have that kind of access in a prison? No, I don't think so. And the thing is having access is one thing, but our protection advocacy system has been so underfunded and decimated. In Vermont, it's a collaboration between Vermont Legal Aid gets contracted out a lot of the disability work. But those systems have been so gutted, I don't think you can give them additional responsibilities without additional resources. But I will say, having once been one of those staff attorneys and supervising 4 paralegals who are supposed to respond to the complaints of people in facilities, there is nothing worse and more demoralizing for the people who are supposed to help to not be resourced enough to respond to those calls. Because if you're in a psychiatric home, if your loved one is in restraint and seclusion, and you're calling the people who are supposed to help and there's no help coming, it's really hard and awful. And I just want to say one thing because I appreciated the comments. Sorry, Representative made about some of the people when they're just super out of control. And I want to share a story about a client I had in Connecticut, a civil client I had in Connecticut in the forensic facility. This was a young man. I can speak publicly about him because he was subject of newspaper stories and investigations. Jamie Tomasek, he was held in 4-point bed restraint in the waiting forensic facility as a civil patient. He had committed no crimes, was not accused of any crimes. He was very out of control. He put 23 staff members out on comp. So the facility's only response to him was to keep him for more than a year in 4-point bed restraint. That's for folks who don't know what 4-point bed restraint means is his wrists were bound and his feet were bound. So I personally filed the complaint with CMS that brought an inspection team in, and that unit was put out of compliance because they were violating every rule around restraint and seclusion you could think of. And an organization from California, of all places, came to Connecticut. It was the Institute of Applied Behavioral Analysis, IABA. And they said, if you can't find a community provider to treat this gentleman in Connecticut, we will take him to California. So after many months of them having staff on the ground working with him, and even when he left in a Lear jet, $15 million worth of Lear jet to transport him from Connecticut to California, he was transported like Hannibal Lecter, all bound up in his restraints. He was released from the restraints when he was across the Continental Divide. To this day, has not spent a minute in restraint since. Were the people in Connecticut bad? No. They did the best with the resources they had in the environment he was in. Should a civil person never convicted of a crime ever have been in that facility? No, absolutely not. So why am I so passionate about this particular work? And I'm so worried that with Ann Donahue out, of all the years of trying, really what I think is the worst proposal we've had has a chance of going through. So it's really not very often that my lived experience has any bearing on anything here. But I would just say, after having practiced with individual clients and then taught in a master's program and then now worked on policy, trying to fix things. The reason I left lawyering was I thought it'd be so much better to fix things at policy level, not an individual client level. I want to say that this is just one of these toughest situations. It is great if you were giving a final exam, because it's one of these situations where everyone is right. And I should start there. I want to first and foremost say the crime victims that you've been hearing from, is that you guys? The crime victims that you heard from, they are right. And more often than not, people with disabilities, particularly people who are nonverbal or counseling, they are more often victims of crimes than perpetrator of crimes. The system that the crime victims have been facing in this process, it's just not right. And I think it might have been your bill, someone had a bill in that was going to make the process better, give crime victims and their families access to more information at different stages along the way. I think that is a great idea. I wholly support making things better for the crime victims. It's also a situation where the people who want public safety are right. There is no reason why someone should be out on an order of non-hospitalization and not getting adequate supervision. An order of hospitalization is not worth the paper it's written on if people are not complying with the terms in it. And if there's a problem, I think that could be added to the study of the designated and specialized services agencies, giving them a forensic specialty team whose job it is to oversee the orders of hospitalization. It's not really rocket science. In Connecticut, they restore people to competency in the community with community treatment specialists. And guess what? They find out that if you provide people housing, as part of a 5-year study of homelessness issues in people with serious mental illness, I think schizophrenia, the biggest solution is if you can provide people housing, they stay treatment compliant. And do I think it's coercive to condition housing on treatment? Ask me when I'm not in this seat. But if you provide someone housing, and that's part of what they get if they stay on their O&H, you're going to have a more likelihood of success. But if someone is struggling to find housing, it's very hard to stay on any medication regimen.
Let's back up just a.
Yes.
You have you mentioned the protection and advocacy system.
Yes.
And in fact, in your written testimony, it's capitalized as if it is an actual system. Is it a system? And who, and what is it? And what statute provides?
Oh, I love this question. So the protection and advocacy system, I capitalized it because it is part of a statute. So there's the national protection. So the way they wrote the law, I'm trying to think of who came first, but there's PAMI. I think that came first. Protection and advocacy for individuals with mental illness is the first law. Yes. And then there's PAD, protection and advocacy for people with developmental disabilities. So the protection and advocacy system is a network of federal laws that requires every state to have a protection and advocacy system. And that's supposed to be staffed by attorneys. The one in Vermont, I'll say, has often had a non-attorney director, but right now we have an attorney director. And then that system is charged with doing outreach on the ground in places like Brattleboro Retreat. But really, anywhere a person with a disability is being held basically under color of state law, prisons have been really hard to get into, are supposed to have access from an advocate from the protection and advocacy system. Places where this is broken down, if you have a state contract with a private place, like Brattleboro Retreat, you have to jump through some hoops sometimes. When they were all state-operated psychiatric hospitals, it was easier, the access is clearer. But anyway, protection and advocacy access to places wherever this restoration process or people who are not restorable or being held, I think would be key, would be a place to start. If this were a hospital, hospitals themselves are subject to inspections by this thing that used to be called JCO, but now it's called the Joint. But anyway, it's a panel of outside medical professions that come into your medical facility and they look at everything. What's really great for that, for the people who are in the hospitals, is they have an actual opportunity to speak one-on-one with the inspectors from the Joint. And so when you're in one of these facilities, it's not often you get outside eyes on. But I think a place like this should have as many outside eyes on as possible. And the thing about everyone being right.
Before we go on,
Yes,
is that, can you provide like citation or additional information to the protection?
Yes. Yes, I will.
That'd be very helpful.
I will. And I will say that in Vermont, when I worked there, it was called Vermont Protection Advocacy. It's now called Disability Rights Vermont. But Disability Rights Vermont is the designated protection advocacy system for Vermont.
Okay.
Then they do subcontract with legal aids, disability law track for the pad work and other contracts. But and they have a board, and it's similar to our organization. They're required to have a certain number of people with lived experience on their board. And
Okay, great.
so the thing about everyone being right is I said this to my husband this morning. He said, even Melania. And I'll say, yes, even Melania is right. And why is Melania right? Melania wants accountability too. She wants a public hearing. She wants the truth to come out. So in this particular situation, everyone is right. And the advocates, the civil libertarians who are saying this isn't a good process, there isn't enough oversight, this is the wrong place to put some of the most vulnerable people. Don't have to do all this for 6 people. We're right too. And I don't see in 193 where there are adequate civil liberties protections. So that's, I was hesitant because it's like if you're so against something, you don't necessarily want to make it better. But, if I took that attitude, it would still say, I think it might still say brain disease and defect. And that's just really deplorable language at this point. So I do hope to make things better. I really hope to make things better in the sense that we just don't go down a road in a prison situation and open ourselves up to another lawsuit. The things that I left you guys with as additional resources is a link, 2 things. The discussion came up yesterday about whether or not there's an attack on people with disabilities, or on people with disabilities. And I just want to say for the record, there's very much an attack on people with disabilities. I gave you a link to a study by the Center on American Progress that just goes for everything from the president's executive order that would allow people who are homeless but have a substance use disorder, mental health, to be treated involuntarily, to the defunding of special education, to the de-firing of all the Office of Civil Rights lawyers who are working on special education. People with disabilities are feeling very much unsupported and under attack in this environment. And I would say that for the attorney from the protection and advocacy system to be questioned about is this real or not, I just felt it really necessary to add a document with citations. The other thing that I try really hard to do in my testimony, and that's why I include the link to an article about the Whiting Forensic Facility. So I moved back to Vermont in 2017, earlier than that. But in 2017, news broke that at the Whiting Forensic Facility, there was caught on camera. Cameras would be really important, essential. It was a hard fight to get cameras. It was a hard fight actually against the union who works in these facilities to get cameras. But caught on camera, attached to my additional resources, please read about what happened at the Whiting Forensic Institute. Over 40 good employees lost their job because of the horrific patient abuse they were involved in there. They literally put soiled diapers on this gentleman's head. They literally gave him hand sanitizer to use as lotion, skin moisturizer, to do whatever he would do with skin moisturizer, would just try doing that with hand sanitizer. literally, I did not make this up. One of the people who were arrested was the head nurse. And what was really sad to me was that when we were working to get the guy who had been 4-point restrained out of that facility at that time, that head nurse who was newer then was one of our principal change agents. And that's what he called himself in his role. I'm a change agent. And then there he was. And the abuse that went on in waiting was just horrific. And it was in the modern era and caught on film. And so Connecticut is now paying hefty lawsuits. That's the article that I included. And that's why I don't go so far as to say someone took offense to the if you build it, they will come. But I will say if you put people, whether they're the staff or the residents, in a dehumanizing situation, they lose their humanity. And then if you put good administrators, and Schatz, the commissioner, DCF, good people, if you give them a system and not the resources to run, bad things happen. So I would just say, I think there are a lot of questions that can be answered. What do other states do? Can we contract? Can we do something different that haven't been answered? I'm not saying do another summer study. I learned something from a study that I was on related to housing for people with disabilities. If the legislature asks answerable questions that you really want the answers to, how long would it take to create 600 units of housing? What would it cost? Actual answerable questions, and you give us a group of people a short amount of time till November. We had till November 15th to have our. We answered it, and guess what? The answers are being acted on this session in committees. They're moving through. So I'm not saying a study for the sake of a study, but I think you could narrow it down to some really critical questions, get answers to those, and then do something better than this. One question, what is this going to cost? I don't think it's even been costed out. But I'll just say in general, institutional care is usually by orders of magnitude far more expensive than community care, even with 3-on-1 staffing. Even with what we had for my guy in California was the staff had their own safe room and they had doors that closed. I mean, there are ways to manage security in the community. They had training, they had various people on backup, and they were allowed in California to use ankle monitors. One thing Representative Donahue and I talked about the last time is our community system. If you gave our community system just some additional tools like that, we could solve a lot of problems. Our community system right now, surprisingly, even the crisis homes are not allowed to prevent AWOL. Like they can't do hands-on. They can't have a secure perimeter. There's so many things that we could be doing in the community if we wanted a secure residence community that right now we can't do that. And Donahue, God bless her, has really good ideas about. But we can do better. With the lifetime with the offenders in Connecticut that are sex offenders they can release to the community. That's another thing about this population. People with developmental disabilities, sometimes they're in the sex offender registry, makes housing really hard. That's why in Connecticut, what they found is that they provided housing for the people who they wanted to keep eyes on. They were able to keep eyes on much better. And some of those people just have such obstacles and challenges to finding housing, like sex offenders. I lost that thread for you guys. So I do think we can, I know what I was going to say. In Connecticut, what they're doing with long-term sex offenders, they cannot be released. And I want to get up to date on this, but they were starting to investigate. Here's a research question. What properties does Vermont still have on the grounds of the former state hospital or anywhere else in the state that can be used for these residences? But what they were doing with sex offenders who they were never going to let out, they served their time in prison. And then under some new Supreme Court law, if they still have the propensity to reoffend, which certain sex offenders will, never be without that propensity, rather than keeping them permanently in a prison, they're building gated communities, actual houses with rooms, but gated, perimeter, secured. So I think I loved your question, Representative Arsenault. What are other states doing?
And I'll credit Representative Rachelson for,
pointing out, like maybe a contract would be a better solution, with other, with another state. So I'm intrigued as well by, what you were just talking about, how changes to, like, pretty specific changes to our community system, community, care system could go a long way. And you mentioned a couple of them. Do you have in mind a list, like an exhaustive list of what that would look like or what we would need to do?
I could come up with one. I really think that our designated and specialized services agencies are not currently funded or staffed or outfitted. And I'm not suggesting that each agency would have to have a forensic treatment specialist, but perhaps within their umbrella, they could have a forensic treatment group that's paid,
Like a couple in the state.
that's paid at a higher rate, that supervises ONHs, that does the hard work of, I think one of the things that's so hard for staff for an agency to take on risky clients is no one wants your staff to get hurt. So, and so you've got to give them the tools, both in training and in equipment. My guy, we've had to figure this out for a while, but he was actually more dangerous when he was in restraint because he was always fighting that. When they let him out of restraint and would have him on constant observation, far less injuries and assaults. And the constant observation had to go a certain way. This takes training. And this was where the head nurse who then went wrong, was so key. He would instruct his people, if he gets up, you follow him. If he gets up and you say, where are you going? Bad stuff happens. He gets up, you follow him. That's your job. Eyes on, constant observation. But it's hard to train that and then do that consistently 24. Like, think about the behaviors and what they'd say about why they don't like to do behavioral programs in facilities is you need consistency 24/7. If John says, I want another cookie, if that's a trigger, everyone's got to respond the same way. But every weekend shift, every shift, consistency. And that's hard to do in an institutional setting. It's even hard to do in the community. That's what they need resources.
Other questions? So I think I cracked a lot of the questions that you thought that we should ask. Because I think, one of the things, we do have the report coming in October, and we could add to that as well, but understand. Any other ideas, though, as far as for oversight?
Well, I think the oversight is important because I take from that there'd be oversight kind of in each step of the process. So one of the things that concerns me is, so I work in the Agency of Human Services. We have a mantra, agency of one. So Department of Corrections, Department of Mental Health, Department of Disabilities, Aging and Independent Living, they are an agency of one. If there's no one from outside that cluster having anything to say about who's even going in the doors of the facilities that are operating, to me, that's where oversight has to attach to them, and a need for some independent clinical assessments at that point.
And is that something that Disability Rights Vermont, in conjunction with legal aid, could be the entity to do that oversight?
But I would have to think on that. They might be able to provide legal representation, but what I'm thinking of more is just even the clinical opinions. Just getting some, I've seen it take hold, I saw it take hold, unfortunately, with healthcare reform. There becomes a group think.
Right.
It's very hard to get
But I'm just trying
out
to
of. So the clinical group think, or the clinical assessment of this person is a certain way. Like, I would love to see a clinical contract with Yale forensic program, someone outside the state who's got the expertise.
Director at Howard, Isn't she the one who's at Yale that testified?
Yes, Sim Raven has a connection with Yale. I don't know what it is. But
Faculty, I think she's in.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, because the oversight is definitely one of the.
oh, but let me just say something about that. But having also no contract, no connection, and that'll be so hard to do. With the Vermont Department of Mental Health, with the Vermont Agency of Human Services. And I think one of the things that happened when in the way back machine, when I did this work on the ground, it's it's so small. The people doing the evaluations. So anyway, that you're with the advent of remote work, who knows if these kinds of evaluations can be done remotely, but really Connecticut's not that far, and they have expertise.
What, I know you mentioned the Yale School of Psychiatry and then a Connecticut forensic facility. Is there one other than Whiting? Or is that the one we would look to?
Yeah, so Whiting went through that really awful abuse schedule process, and then they've had to become independent and not Medicaid supported, and I think that they are better now. But you know what? After you asked that question yesterday of who does, I was thinking of reaching out to people I know who do this kind of work, and what you would look for is a place with fewer deaths and adverse events. I don't know that there really are good ones, but there are probably less bad ones. Fewer.
You were bad ones.
Yes. Fewer. So, I just do want to leave you with, I don't think that this is an easy problem to solve. If it was, it would have been solved long before you guys were in these seats.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So we will be adjourning momentarily to Tuesday at 9 a.m. We will be looking at doing a drive-by. We don't have jurisdiction of the bill, but it's kind of in our area of Representative Booton's amendment to proposed amendment to H218, which I see has been sent to the entire House. But so we'll be taking that up on Tuesday. We'll have probably the representative and a couple witnesses to have an understanding of that. And then we will share our viewpoint with the Environment Committee once we have figured out what that is. And also next week, we have a lot more testimony on 193. And we'll probably have some testimony as well on S208. I think those are the two bills that we'll be looking at next week. All right.